Hey guys, I'm so glad to be back making videos. It's been a few weeks now, 2, 3 weeks. I haven't recorded anything, so yeah, quite happy about being back into it. Today we will make something very simple, very quick video, a little warm up, and that will be about singletons. Singletons that I use a lot in my projects, my series, and pretty much all the videos really. So here I will not discuss the 4 reasons why I'm not using Autoloads as my singleton source, and we will just focus on how to make the singleton and how does it work exactly, right? So you do have the basic knowledge of what does what. Okay, so let's get a new Godot project where we will make singletons. Okay, so before anything, let's begin by defining and describing what a singleton is. A singleton is a programming pattern. It is something that you can do in any programming language as long as you have the tools to do it. And patterns all have their uses. The singleton pattern is basically used for two things, right? So let's check the page on the Godot documentation. So here we have a full description of the singleton in the view of an autoload, right? So it's not really accurate to what a real true singleton is. For instance, here you have this note which says that Godot will make an autoload a true singleton. There are a few things which are different, but we can basically go on the Wikipedia page to get the definition of what a true singleton is. And the definition of true singleton comes with those points, right? So first we want to ensure that we only have one instance of the singleton. Then we want to provide an easy access to that instance, and we want to control their instantiation. So that's a little bit, I don't want to say unnecessary, but it's the part which basically makes the difference between a simple singleton and a complex singleton. Also, on Godot, we don't have anything such as private or public access, so controlling the instantiation can be a little bit trickier. And it does still work, but it's a little bit less useful, I guess. So why do we want a singleton? To ensure that there is only one instance of it. Any class you define, any object you define, by default can be instantiated an infinite amount of times. And that's part of the job of an object or a class, to be usable many times. And every time you create an object based on the pattern of a class, you create an instance of that object. But when we speak about singletons, what we actually want in this situation is to have a single unique instance for that object. What it means is that in the design of the program or the code or anything you do really, it doesn't make sense to have more than one instance of that object. Or to say it's differently, you actually require this instance to be capped to a maximum amount of one, because if there's different instances, it can become, kind of weird. Let's just think about data, for example. When you run the game and you have like the player profile, you don't want to have different instances of different player profiles running at the same time with different values. Maybe some games do need that, but in most of the games, like think about Cookie Clicker, for example. In Cookie Clicker, you don't need to have different sets of data with different amount of cookies and different amount of upgrades. It doesn't make sense, right? Because the game is just played as a single player thing. So for that matter, you do want to force that the instance of the data class is unique, basically. The second part, which is provide easy access to that instance, is why we want to make singletons most of the time. Because even though being unique is useful to protect the duplication and wanting duplications, there's no reason really that you program so badly that you duplicate so many things which should not be duplicated, right? That it can happen by mistakes, definitely, but you shouldn't be like doing it every other day, right? That's really the kind of mistakes you would make when something goes very wrong and the project is going on for a very long time. So anyway, the main reason why we want to make singletons is that if the instance is guaranteed to be unique, then you basically can access it from a larger scope and a semi-global scope. This is what's interesting in the concept of singleton. Singleton being accessible in a semi-global state is absolutely golden. It allows, for example, to have your resource manager that manages the Stardust if you have seen the series. And you can access it from anywhere in the game. You don't need to get a reference to that manager, to that instance of the manager, because it is semi-global. The main difference there is between a global and semi-global thing is that global instances are pretty much what autoloads are. They are at the root of the project. So if you create a resource manager in an autoload, it's going to be global because you can invoke resource manager directly, right? But in the case of our singletons, it's slightly different because basically when we want to catch the instance of the singleton, it is not on the global scope. It is in the scope of the class that defines the singleton. So basically, you do have to get in the scope of resource manager as a class pattern to then, in that class pattern, get the instance, which is the one and unique instance of the singleton. So it kind of adds one tiny little step to get the instance in a semi-global access opposed to the autoload thing, which is fully global. Right, that's enough talking about singletons and what do they do and what they are. Let's go on Godot and just check the very simple syntax. Just to keep things simple, I created a game scene, which I saved in my scene folder as usual. We will make this game scene a singleton. So what we do basically is we create a script which we attach to whatever we want to make a singleton. Here we will make that node a singleton, but you can make anything a singleton really. It doesn't have to be a node, it can be a class. It can be maybe a resource, but I guess you can make everything, right? Here, I'm usually more interested in the nodes to be singletons and other things will be unique if they have to because they are properties of a singleton. right? For example, if I create a variable data in there, which doesn't exist, but if I create variable data, I usually don't explicitly make it a singleton because I want it to be part of the game object, the game instance. So it is unique because game is unique, if that makes sense. So what we want to do all the time, every time, is get a class name for the singleton. Because we will have to refer to this as the scope, the semi-global scope that will encapsulate the singleton. So we do need that class name. Then we need to create a place to store the reference of the one unique instance. That comes in the form of a static variable, which you can name instance. You can name it pretty much anything you want. If you want to name it socks, it's okay, of course. But I usually name it ref because that's short, and I know that references are usually references to instances of objects. So here I have it named ref, and I type it with the exact same name of the class here. It has to say basically I want to reference an instance of myself. That's what it says. So now basically it's all a matter of how do I set this reference and how do I make sure it lasts in time. We use the enter tree method. So usually I just, put the enter tree in there and that's it. But just for the sake of this example, I will have this method which I named singleton check, like this. Whoops. It's a void, and at the moment it does nothing. And what I'm going to do is create the enter tree method like this and have this singleton check in there. So why do I do this right now is because enter tree may have some logic in it, right? And when that happens, I find it easier to just have the singleton stuff at the top completely decoupled, not really, but in a different area from where the actual logic of the class is, and basically it's after all the properties. Entity is often defined after the properties, and I kind of want to have a singleton at the top. So I just make this little distinction, but it really doesn't matter. So from there, what I basically do is that whenever any instance is created, right? Because when the node entered the tree, it's basically when the object is instanced. What I want to do is check if there is a reference. And what I mean there is do we already have an instance of the class game in a game? If there's not a reference, then it means that I must take the take the slot, and I will do it. Otherwise, if there is one, then I want to basically destroy myself. Because as an object, I'm trying to take a slot which is already occupied, and there is no reason for anyone else to try to take that spot. And if someone tries to take the spot, they should basically break everything they're doing and go in the queue for recycling. Otherwise, as I said, if the slot is not occupied, we want to take the slot. So we just assign the new instance, which is self, to the reference slot. This is everything you need to make a singleton on Godot. It's a little bit different to implement than the autoloads, and you will have to manually instantiate those things somewhere. For example, nodes can be instantiated simply by being in this situation the root node of the game, right? So because it's the root node of the game, it will automatically be added to the game. But sometimes you just need to create a new instance. So let's imagine that data here is a singleton. I'm gonna imagine that the data objects exist even though it doesn't, but you will have something like data.new. Is that is that it? I can't remember. Yes, I guess it is it. It's been a long time since I haven't coded in Godot, and I tend to forget things very quickly, but anyway. You create that new object, and that will try basically to go through this. Is there reference? Yes, no, etc., etc. And what's interesting is that you could basically make things a little bit different to try to create a new node, a new not a node, sorry, a new instance of the singleton, and if there's already one, you actually copy the reference instead. That could be the kind of behaviors, I don't know. We never know what you could be needing for your projects. All right, just a little bit of a disclaimer regarding this structure right there. Um, you may have seen in my old videos sometime that I thought using basically was it just free, the free method instead of Q free. That was a mistake because the free method is basically, I don't want to say discontinued, but I think it's something like not compatible with. It's not meant to be used on Godot 4 or any version of some version of Godot, which is the most recent one. And when you try to basically compile the game in an application, it doesn't work when you have free somewhere. So it has to be Q free, right? So yeah, this pattern is just my take on what is the shortest way to implement a singleton with what I have at hand with GDScript. That's maybe different ways to make singletons. And I didn't have any feedback on this. So in my own usage, I didn't have any problem with it. But maybe there's this kind of very weird situation that I don't anticipate because it's just not in my brain scope somehow. And yeah, it could not work in some very tiny situations. So you might have to tinker with it a little bit, but that shouldn't be happening that soon, especially if you do things, very simple things, and things which are close to what I do. So anyway, disclaimers aside, let's now explain exactly how this works, right? So I explained already how this singleton check works, but what's a little bit more cryptic sometimes is this static, right? So the static keyword can be confusing for some people. Just like if you don't know what it is, it's confusing. That's the thing. Anyway, basically, a static variable or method is a property or method that is going to be shared by all the instances of the class. So, in short, what it means is, let's say you have, it's gonna be a weird behavior, but it explains well how static variables work. Let's say you have a game where you want to basically click on bats, little bats appearing, and you have they're flying, and you click on them. And every time you click on a bat, it increases your score. And let's say that for some reasons the score, which is basically bats clicked, is located in the class bat, right? So the class bat is what you're going to use to create tons of little bats on the screen that you will want to click. And each instance is going to have its own things, its own position, its own animation, time, frames, whatever, you know what I mean. And they will also have their own destruction method, right? So that when you click on the bat, it disappears. And you don't want all the bats to disappear, you want only the one which is clicked. So that's pretty much what instancing is. You create different duplicates of an object based on a blueprint. But then again, you want to keep track of how many bats have been clicked. Or maybe actually, I don't know, you want to have the speed of a bat? That's actually a little bit more clever. You have the speed of the bats, and that is shared by all the bats altogether. And when you click on something in the UI which changes the difficulty, the speed will go up. And instead of saying, all right, I want to get all the bats in the game and change their current speed, and then from now on, every time I create a new bat, I want to change its speed, right? That could be very heavy to do. Well, not that heavy, but annoying at the very least. What you can do instead is basically create this static variable. Static variables are, as I said, shared by all the instances. So it is not linked or tied to an instance, right? So even if you don't have an instance of the class existing somewhere, you still have the static variables and static methods existing. They exist in the blueprint, basically, which is the semi-global encapsulation bubble. They exist in there, the static thing. And yeah, that's pretty much it, really. Like, every time an object, which is an instance of a bat, is accessing the speed, they access the static variable. It's that simple. And the reason why it's important here is because we do exactly the same. We actually have the reference of the singleton basically being encapsulated in the bubble, the virtual bubble of the game class, which has no instance yet, but we will create an instance and then link that instance. And now that we're talking about it, I just want to warn you about something, because one of the main reasons you don't see this on YouTube is because static variables, and when I say this, I really mean this singleton pattern instead of Autoloads, right? Sorry, forgot to precise. But yeah, static variables they are very recent thing, right? I think I don't remember exactly when, but they have been introduced in either 2024 or 2023. But whatever it is, it's still very, very new. And for that matter, before the Godot 4. Maybe 1 or just Godot 4, it was absolutely impossible to make singletons like this. So it is actually very normal that you see so much content telling you make autoloads, make autoloads, make autoloads, because you're actually most likely either watching a content that was created before static variables were even in Godot, or you are basically watching the content of someone who thinks there's no other way to make singletons because it's not out there. I mean, you get what I mean, right? So anyway, it's been a long discussion about singletons already. So now let's see how we use singletons. Using singletons is absolutely trivial. Let's just have a variable in there, which is text. It's gonna be text. And text is gonna be a string equal to hello world. Yes. So now I'm gonna create a new scene, which is gonna be a gray node again. And that will be not in game scene node. So I'm gonna save this in its own folder, not in game scene. I'm gonna save this and create a script. So here we are in a class which is completely separated from game. Okay, so I can't use the editor to do things like drag and dropping or get node, right? Get node, well, we can, but it's you can, but it's a little bit meh. So anyway, um, you want to use the singleton basically to get access to the instance of game with the premise that there's only one in a game. So how do we do this? We just have this function ready. I mean, you don't have to be in ready, obviously, but let's have an instruction using a property from game. We just call on the game scope again, and in that bubble, we find the static reference that references the one and only existing instance of game. And that's it, right? So from there, you can basically have text. And let's say that we want to print that text like this. There we go. You can decide to print that text. If you want to have this be a little bit prettier, sometimes it's very useful. You basically want to have this game, the variable game, type game, equal game ref. I don't know. Or maybe just so that you get it right, you have this variable manager of type stardust, ionized stardust resource manager. Let's say you have that kind of thing. You have this, right? Ionized, oh god, stardust resource manager. I think that now you see the point of that line, right? Totally. So anyway, we have this. Let's get rid of this, and just to do things for the sake of doing things. There we go. So we have not in the game scene thing, but obviously the game scene right there, it will obviously be the root node of the game, so everything will ultimately appear in there, in that scene. But that will come in the form of doing this, drag and dropping in. There we go. So it is in the same tree here, but it's not in the same tree here. That's the main. So now if I just start the game, I have this. And why is it so long? I don't know why, but since I've been back home, my Godot things take ages to launch. Whether it's the editor, the project list, or apparently this. I don't know what happened. Maybe I will have to reinstall a different version a non-Steam version. Oh, finally. There we go. We have our to hello world. Right, it's already way too long. I mean, it's okay, right? If you just want to see what the pattern looks like, grab it. And if you want the full explanation, you have it. So there you go. That will be all for today. Very quickie video, simple subject. And now, every time I talk about singletons, I finally have something to point people toward, and I don't have to explain it all again and again. So that's cool. So anyway, I hope you liked it, that you learned something, and that you will finally decide to stop using autoloads for things which don't need autoloads, right? That's kind of, I'm gonna say that's one of my projects, but really people need to know that you don't have to use autoloads for everything when you can just do this little block, which is very simple. At first, it was annoying to remember it, but now that I know it exactly in my head, it's very, very useful. So anyway, hope you liked the video, and I will see you in the next one, which is, I have no idea.